Hey everyone, the title of this video is going to be called Is Faith Foreign to Christians? And really, my purpose in this is to show the position that a lot of Christians have in this world and how they see somebody that, like me, is walking in faith. But it's not only me. There are a lot of people that do. There's a lot of people that want to be used by God as a conduit of blessing, whether it's serving in another area, another state, another country. And a lot of people are trusting God as their provider, as their source. You know, anybody that wants to be a missionary, they're trusting what God has for them. And there are people out there that wish to serve God in that capacity. But unfortunately, a lot of people like them are judged. And that's usually from the standpoint of the world and how the world sees that. The world sees anybody in that position of not having what this world says that you got to have: a good paying job, money saved up. So anybody that's not walking in that same capacity is judged negatively from the viewpoint of the world. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Christians that also walk in that capacity as well, seeing from the world's standpoint rather than God's. And I have noticed that when I started my faith walk in God, just how many Christians came against that. None of them came to me, mind you, to inquire. They didn't ask me, so what are you doing? You know, and only one brother came to me to find out. And I told him. And once I told him, he was okay with it, because anybody that could see what I was doing for God and stuff from a world's viewpoint and the world's ways of focusing could judge me from the standpoint of the world that he's lazy, doesn't want to work, when really that wasn't the case at all. So talking with somebody would have helped them to see that. So really, a friend of mine and we had agreed that the church really doesn't know what walking in faith is. A brother of mine is walking in faith for something that he believes is from the Lord. And of course, according from the world's viewpoint, they'll be like, man, you're crazy. What are you doing that for? Doesn't that sound ridiculous to you? But this is what faith is. So that's the first question I have in this video is, what is faith? Well, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So we're hoping what God is going to bring about. We haven't seen it yet, but that hope is the pathway from what is unsure to what is sure. You know, so many times in my life, I had walked in faith for something, believing that God was going to bring it about. Like my first apartment, you know, from the viewpoint of, in the standpoint of faith, God told me through journaling to start packing. Now, I didn't have a place yet, but he said to start packing, and that's exactly what I started doing. And so, keeping that close connection with God in journaling, so that I knew what steps to take, so I knew what to do, both obedience wise, character wise, and also faith wise. And so, believing that God was going to bring it about, looking at the confirmations from different people, you know, looking closely at what my pastor was saying, things that he was saying that, oh, that's what God had told me. So I would write that next to the part in the journal where it touched on that specific area. So I wrote that down, believing. And so there was a brother that said that he had a dream of me coming out of the new place into my car. So I took that as, okay, I'm on the right track. God is going to bring that about. That is confirmation that what I'm believing for is from God. And so I was told about an apartment that was open. So I went to check it out, and God said to claim it. So I claimed the place as mine. And so spoke with the landlady. She told us how much it was going to cost, rent wise, security deposit wise. We needed so much money. And so, to make a long story short, God provided exactly what we needed to get the place. And it just worked out. So it proved that God was true. It proved that walking in faith was true. So then I started learning everything at that time about how Christians are still walking in that place in the viewpoint of the world rather than God's viewpoint and God's position on somebody that walks in faith. And I know that Abraham walked in faith. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Well, he was walking in faith. He didn't do anything. He didn't follow any rules of the world or the financially elite, but God called him righteous. So why is it that Christians see somebody that's walking in faith as unrighteousness when God calls them righteous? So there is a misconception. There is a false view that a lot of Christians are operating in. Now, I'm not thinking about the world. The world's going to have their viewpoint against anybody like that. But I'm talking about Christians that are taking the viewpoint of the world rather than taking God's viewpoint. So, I had already said that, Christians take on the viewpoint of the world. Then they take on the world's position rather than God's position. And you start seeing as one of the world and judging from an earthly standpoint. Instead of praise for following Jesus, those that are walking in faith are judged as lazy, ridiculous, and stuff like that. And, it's actually pretty sad that that is the position of a lot of believers. Instead of praising somebody, oh, you're following Jesus, that is so cool, they start judging somebody from the viewpoint of the world, because the world has its way of functioning, and that's for Mammon. Mammon teaches the financially elite these laws of success. And if you don't know what laws of success are, check out my older videos. I have it listed so you know exactly what it is. But it's the laws the financially elite create. It's the viewpoints, it's the judgments that they have to keep somebody in line and focused on the world's ways of doing things rather than God's. And that's the enemy's ploy. If he can keep somebody from trusting God, relying on God, doing opposite of what Jesus taught in Matthew 6, then he's accomplished his task. And so I spoke in other videos about this distraction that the enemy uses against Christians to keep their eyes off God and onto what they got to do in this world. So there needs to be a transition for Christians if you agree that you've seen this exact thing in a lot of Christians, maybe you've witnessed yourself, maybe you've witnessed it in conversation, or maybe you have judged somebody falsely when they said that they're following God, but you have this criticism of them. And you're thinking, oh, they need to get a job. They need to save money. They need to be practical. They need to be logical. Well, if you saw from that viewpoint, then you must see that it is not God's viewpoint. Because what about the chapter of faith in Hebrews 11? All those people were walking in faith. Even though it looked ridiculous and illogical, God brought about what was promised. And so with Abraham, God brought him a son. With Abraham, God led him out of his family's household and into the desert, something that's ridiculous. Faith is, according to world standpoint, it's illogical, but in God's kingdom, it's logical. So there needs to be a refocusing that needs to take place with Christians. If you are taking the position of somebody of the world rather than God's position, then a refocus needs to be taken place. We need to see from the Spirit's standpoint. And if we do so, we're no longer seeing from the world's viewpoint. We're no longer looking at people from the world's viewpoint. We're looking at people through the eyes of love and understanding. So the question is, how do you wish to see, and from what standpoint do you wish to see from the Spirit's standpoint? Not judging people, but actually taking their word for it. Do you see the fruit that's being produced in their lives? Have you heard about what God's done in their lives? Have you taken the time to listen to them? How has God provided for them? What has God done in their lives? And if you could see what God has done in their lives, then you can see how the Spirit is moving in the lives of so many people. And Jesus touched on that in John chapter 3 with Nicodemus. The Spirit moves where it will, but you cannot tell where it goes or where it comes. So the question is your mind renewed? According to Romans 12:1 and 2. If you are seeing from the world's viewpoint and you believe the laws that this world has rather than God's viewpoint, then a refocus needs to be made. A renewing of the mind needs to be made to no longer conform to the world's standards, but being transformed. And that's how the mind is renewed. It can only be done through God. Seeing what you believe is the majority of your thoughts and your judgments and your criticism from the standpoint of the world, or is it from God's? We know God says that you're not to judge, but it takes really writing down what you believe. And if it is being outweighed by the flesh and the viewpoint of the world and a lack of faith, then a refocus needs to be made. So, as I was thinking about this, I used to think in my videos that every single person needs to walk in faith. And to a certain point, they do. But there are also some people that are called by God to be a conduit of blessing for those that are in need, for those that are walking in faith, to be a conduit of blessing, to be used by God to provide for those that, want to get a ministry started, or, to provide maybe a vehicle or a place. So in order for that to happen, they can't see from the world's viewpoint. They need to see from God's viewpoint. And having faith in what God is going to do in the lives of people that want to fully trust him. And so I had used to think that every single person, every Christian needed to walk in faith, whatever that meant. But, it depends on if they're going to listen to God. Listening to God and being led by him is what needs to happen. So then I thought that, well, there also need to be people that are walking in faith as a conduit of blessing for those that are walking in full faith, being used by God to be a blessing. What if somebody's walking in faith for a car? Well, being a conduit of blessing would mean that God is used by you to bless them with a car. Or if somebody's walking in faith for an apartment, being a conduit of blessing for them. What if somebody is being led by God to do a certain ministry or to start one? Well, God may use you as a conduit of blessing to pour into that start of that ministry. Whatever it is, walking in faith and listening to God and trusting him can be used in that capacity as well to be a blessing to others. So it's not necessarily walking in full faith, relying on him for your daily needs, but walking in faith to be used as a conduit of blessing for other people. So I just wanted to share that with you. I pray that this video blesses you. And, it's really trusting God together, and not seeing people, brothers and sisters, from a viewpoint of the world. It's seeing from God's viewpoint, taking God's opinion of them rather than the world's opinion. So thank you for taking the time to watch.